What if blood rather than ink was used to write the real story of Independence Day? Why did a silent hand seal the fates of 9 strong men who fell on the same night? Who was the shadow among them? A woman or a wrath? A slave or a ghost? And what if seeking revenge was a memory awakening rather than a sign of insanity? This isn't a myth. History attempted to forget this. They dubbed it a day of birth, a festival, a fire in the sky, and songs of liberation chanted intoxicatedly. 4th of July, 1844, Kentucky. The weight of delusion and the summer heat caused the earth to crumble. The white people were dancing on land that had earlier been soaked with Cherokee blood and was now steaming from the perspiration of bound hands. They were dressed in lace and linen, under flags sewn by ladies who treated humans like cattle. They toasted freedom. I didn't sense any smiles when I served them that day. Eliza is my name. I'm a member of the Mason family. I wasn't the last one to have that name. Like broken plates, we were swapped out, broken, and then forgotten. My father vanished one summer night after whispering words I still don't understand, and my mother had lashes across her back. However, I recall his final expression, which was defiant and resembled a dying ember rejecting the breeze. At midday, the celebrations got underway. The house was crowded with visitors, including planters and their spouses from nearby counties. Their children taught the young to scowl, leaving behind perfume and contempt. The last to come was Mr. Isaac Thorne. Men paid attention to him even though he wasn't the wealthiest or most land-rich person. His eyes lacked softness and were pallid. Even the cruelly tinged ones laughed too loudly at his tales. He told one that afternoon. He related how Jonah, a slave, dared to look him in the eye and beg him to purchase his daughter's liberty. Isaac related how he had the man lashed for being impolite after denying him. "You teach dogs their place," he added, raising his glass and saying that. There was a roar from the table. Only because I had mastered the art of disappearing while motionless could I stand behind him, steady-handed and holding a tray. Jonah was bent, bleeding, but not broken when I saw him later. He looked directly into my eyes. Something that did not beg was in his eyes. How does a man bleed and still burn? I recall asking myself. As night fell, the fireworks started. To avoid sparking the ladies' clothes, they set them off distant from the main house, next to the tobacco field. Isaac walked by the kitchen as the first explosion reverberated. He paused close to the entrance, talking to a broad-shouldered man I didn't recognize who had a badge tucked under his belt. Isaac laughed, and I heard it. "This evening we elevate the stakes," he remarked. "Steel and fire. The earth has become softer." The man agreed with a grunt. Isaac leaned in. "I owe blood to 9 men. Debts will be settled by morning. Allow the smoke to envelop it." I went cold. I had no idea what it meant, but it had some significance. Not quite yet. As I made my way back to the parlor, I went by the picture of Isaac's late wife, Mistress Caroline. She allegedly confronted Isaac about the girls he had taken from the quarters and then fell out of a window. She jumped, some whispered. She was pushed, according to others. She observed me with painted eyes. I offered brandy. I grinned. I paid attention. As the fireworks erupted, so did their laughter. Jonah's absence went unnoticed. The missing axe from the woodpile went unnoticed. The tension in the air, like a storm concealed beneath the stars, went unnoticed. However, I took note, and I started to hear my father's voice again that night. Only the rhythm, the silent sort that endures in silence, not the words. For them, it was Independence Day. Above, the night was a riot of color, a false star canopy made of pride and powder. Wine-like laughter poured over the terrace, clinking glasses. Verse by verse, songs rose. Men boasted about the cost of meat, horses, and harvests. The hum of stress throbbed beneath it all, like a vein on the verge of rupturing. With a mask on my face and a platter in hand, I moved. Among them, covertly, The house was overflowing with pride. They were fearless. None of them thought their blood could be spilled, their names could be forgotten, or the world might change beneath their boots. They held that property, ancestry, and punishment were all important. They didn't think consequences were real. There was nothing frightening about the initial scream. It had the sound of bewilderment. The east wing gave a sharp bark, and then all was silence. The second followed. Raw, louder, severed. Halfway through. The music stumbled. A sound from a violin hovered in the air, then passed away. The feet shuffled. The glass broke. Then there was silence. The type that draws air from the lungs, then mayhem. With his axe in hand, he emerged from the shadows. Something beyond anger shines in the eyes. I had seen a man in chains weeks earlier, one that I didn't know by name. He had been purchased by Isaac, thrashed upon arrival, and left in the stables, like refuse. He was now unstoppable, cutting, crashing, and moving through dry grass like the wind. With determination, his blade struck flesh. He was not deterred by pleas for pity. His swing was unabated by any cries from his wife or family. The third person to fall was Isaac. He attempted to pull out a revolver, but the axe struck him first, severing his throat and going deep into his collar. He gurgled and attempted to talk. The man remained silent. Thunder was not as loud as his quiet. The visitors dispersed. A few knocked over furniture. Others leaped from the balcony, shattering both dignity and ankles in the process. The militia guards ran in circles while yelling commands and shooting at gloom, but like a shadow slipping through the crevices, the assailant had disappeared. Once more. I stayed motionless, grounded by something other than terror. Nor wonder nor happiness. Something more ancient. Something buried. I saw the night's order disintegrate. The house turned into a bloody labyrinth. Curling around the flooring was smoke. Even after a tablecloth caught fire, the stars above continued to burst. They apprehended a child from the quarter who was running with his sister. Until his bones sang, beat him, claimed to be the murderer, but his eyes were too young and his hands were too tender. I remained silent. I wasn't asked. Nobody ever did. Later, there was silence once more as the bodies were retrieved and the fires were put out. Every chamber was filled with whispers of rebellion, curses, and a demon that had been let loose on the country. They made up stories, shapes, and names for him, but none of them understood reality. I didn't get any sleep. I sat by myself under the stairs. My hands trembled because I knew something had broken, not because I was afraid. Not only life, not just bones. There had been a pause. There was a question that was unavoidable. What if we weren't supposed to survive? What if freedom was something that could never be buried again? The home had fallen silent by daylight, but not in a peaceful way, but rather in the horrified silence that follows a massacre. Carted off by shaking hands, the bodies were gone. Although no one feared to go barefoot, blood had dried into the wood's grain. As though the dead could be kept hidden behind iron and oak, Isaac's study was locked. However, the fear persisted. It persisted thick as dampness. And the lungs. The militia showed up with questions and boots. They roamed the grounds, yelling orders and cruelly questioning the wrong faces. No one spoke as they dragged men from their jobs in the fields, demanded names and demanded guilt. Long ago, the slaves had discovered that it was safer to be quiet than to speak the truth. They desired a narrative that they could write in pen and dangle around a scapegoat's neck. They discovered old and sluggish, Jeremiah was a blacksmith, before his fingers grew numb from using cold irons for years. He had lost his family. His wife passed away during giving birth. His daughter was seized in the spring and sold to a Mississippi man who was attracted to her appearance. Since then, Jeremiah had spoken less. They now claimed that he had lost it and that the fatalities were his payback. I was aware that the axe had been cleaned and hidden behind the stables. too cautiously, almost affectionately. It was the intentional effort of someone, not a maniac. The brutality had memory, and so did the axe. Jeremiah was pulled to the cellar. My eyes were burning as I watched in the shadows. He didn't have any trouble. He remained silent. However, as he went by me, he looked, really looked, not in pleading, fear, or recognition, but as though he saw something that no one else dared. I brought him water that night. The guards had become inebriated, lethargic, and exhausted. I slid in breathlessly. With his shoulders bent but unbroken and his gaze raised to mine, Jeremiah sat shackled. He said, "I did it," in a voice as dry as dust. Not all of it, though. I gazed. He went on. "They wanted blood. I provided them an explanation." His hands shook. Not because he was getting old, but because of the burden he had carried. Everything was taken. All I could remember was my name, my girl, and my hands. I returned that. He gave a small smile. I wasn't the rest, though, not the others. My heart stumbled. Then who? He gave a head shake. "Is it important?" I sat. Next to him, silent. Silence felt divine for the first time. Not lack of presence, but comprehension. Reaching beneath his shirt, he took out a cloth-wrapped object, an iron pendant that bore his mark. He put it in my grasp. "For what?" he muttered. I departed prior to the sunrise. Jeremiah was gone by sunrise. They stated that he committed suicide because he was overcome with guilt. They didn't mention the guard's broken chain close to his wrist, the locked door discovered open, or his bruised throats. They didn't pray before they buried him. The whispering, however, altered in the fields. They were no longer afraid of retaliation. They started to think it was real. The following days were shrouded in a phony serenity. The rhythm of the plantation returned, although there was a change beneath the surface. There was brittle laughing. The prayers sounded practiced. Nobody brought up Jeremiah. Nobody dared to discuss Isaac's last moments. However, I witnessed some of them shudder at the creak of floorboards and look over their shoulders with eyes that were expecting shadows. I started to move differently, not quicker or slower, but purposefully, as though my steps were now someone else's. I never took my eyes off the pendant that Jeremiah handed me. It felt like a heartbeat against my collarbone. What he meant by what follows next was unclear to me, but I already had an answer in my head. There were names, faces, overseers, who punished with a relish that showed more than duty, men who laughed too loudly at Isaac's cruelty, and those who turned away when others suffered but did not raise their hands. Silence may also cause wounds. The first was a man named Enoch. He introduced himself as foreman. He claimed that the sound of his whip was cleaner than the action, and it never collected dust. I discovered him drinking early by the smokehouse, by himself. I remained silent. He turned too late. The axe made one swing. It didn't have to do it again. Isaac's cousin Matthew, who loved bourbon and ladies too young to remember, was the second. He called for a female he had purchased for the evening as he staggered out of the main home at twilight. He never made it to the stairs. In the morning, they discovered him with his eyes wide with a dread I would never understand and his mouth full of cotton. This was not a haunting, but they began talking about spirits. This was a reckoning. Thomas, who was younger and spoke more softly, came in third. He kept ledgers but did not beat or curse. He counted the births and the same quill that kills and sells. He approved transfers in the same way that one would approve packages. He sobbed when I came to get him. "I never touched a soul," he pleaded. I paid attention. I then explained my sister to him. 12 were traded for a bay, mare one winter. On the line, his signature. I had a fire-related dream that night. I only saved one, Isaac's niece, Abigail. She had seen it all as a child. When no one was looking, she once attempted to teach me letters. She also led the militia in the wrong direction when they came hunting. She was hiding in the attic, holding a rosary when I found her. You came to kill me, she said to yourself. I came to decide. Not begging, not prideful, she just stared at me. I had to observe him. I brought the axe down. She cried like if she had been holding her breath too long. There, I left her. Cruelty was not retribution. The blade was constructed from memory. Furthermore, memory could not be diminished once it was sharpened. The house started to get deserted. The visitors ceased to arrive. The giggling completely stopped. They were afraid of something they couldn't identify. Not me. Not quite yet. However, they were aware that something was walking among them now and that it had a complete memory. The final day arrived in silence, shrouded in breathless fear rather than grief. Though its fields were bustling with life and its white columns remained steadfast, the plantation's heart no longer beat. Pause now lingered where men formerly strutted with confidence. Whispers replaced the confidently resounding commands. Nobody inquired about the location of the fire. They were aware that it was still there. It had simply been transferred. As the sun rose, I observed smoke rising from the chimney while standing at the edge of the fields. I recalled the sound of Isaac's boots on the veranda, how his voice was like a bayonet piercing the morning air. The voice has vanished. The quiet he left behind seemed real. They attempted to cover it, talked about illness, insanity, and swamp demons. Some attribute it to the heat, some point the finger at the moon. Never by themselves. Not the years of shackled prayers, broken families, and stolen names. Their shoulders were burdened by the weight of history. They still wouldn't budge. No justice was served after the militia returned. They asked, they in danger, they departed. Some bodies, indeed. Not the whole truth, but a few stories for the papers. No legislation could carry the weight of that fact. They have nothing to do with it. The axe had vanished. It was never discovered. It might have rusted in the ground, awaiting the next hand to recall. Maybe it left, content. But every groaning floorboard still echoed it. I did not run at every step. There was no place to escape. I just walked away. One step, then another. Just the road, the trees, and the silence of a world that might be more than survival. No permission, no chains, no goodbyes. None of them dared to stop me, but they watched me leave. While I was walking, I sensed the other people's eyes, those who were still waiting and yet chained. I took them with me, in flames, not in load. My bones are etched with their names, faces, and dreams. I was still not free. However, I was no longer possessed. A paperboy shouted headlines in a nearby town. Mason Estate Massacre, savage murders 9 people. They marketed dread like candy. I didn't hear anything about Jeremiah, though. Nothing of his sorrow, his last exhale. None of the prayers we muttered into the ground were answered. Our stories were never properly told by them. They won't. The wind, however, is aware. The soil is aware. The trees that observed my father's disappearance are aware. The world may do the same one day. It comes from the silent weight of footfall that won't stop moving, not from books or lectures. Since embers never forget, and fire doesn't ask for permission to start once it's awake.